Hi, and welcome back to the Simplifying Sustainability podcast. I'm Donal, founder and CEO of ENSO.
And I'm Erin, sustainability expert at ENSO.
Today, we're going to be finishing up our 3 podcast series, which we focus on Scope 1 and 2 emissions, then Scope 3, and today we're going to talk about how to start on your emission reductions journey.
We'll be focusing on actionable tips for getting started that are relevant specifically to SMEs.
Yeah, so by the end of this podcast, we're going to have some practical tips on how you can get started with reducing your emissions and then creating an action plan moving forward, which is really feasible for your business. Let's get started. In the past 2 episodes, we talked about Scope 1 and 2, and then also about Scope 3. Erin, can you just give us a really quick summary, because there was a lot of information to unpack over those 2 episodes?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with just a quick reminder of the definitions of Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, because we'll be saying that quite a lot throughout this podcast, I am sure.
Yep.
So your Scope 1 emissions refer to any emissions directly from your operations where you're burning something like maybe natural gas or another kind of fuel source, but it's happening directly on your operational site. Then you have Scope 2, which are emissions from purchased energy. For many businesses, this is just your electricity. So you're looking at your energy bills, or potentially if you're purchasing heating or natural gas from outside, that would be involved in your Scope 2 as well. And then finally, the biggest of the 3 scopes for most businesses, we have Scope 3, which is your indirect emissions. So this includes any emissions from your supply chain, your upstream and downstream value chains, which includes transport, employee commuting, purchase goods and services, waste disposal. There's a lot of different things that go into Scope 3, which is why we highly recommend you listen to our Scope 3 podcast, where we dive a little bit more into how to break it down, how to make it a bit easier, because it is, for many businesses, including ours, the biggest portion of your emissions by far. So That's a quick summary of what each one means. We got into the weeds a little bit about how to measure, setting a baseline, and now we're going to move on to where to go once you have that baseline and you understand your current emissions.
Yeah, a lot of great information in those last 2 podcasts. Mm-hmm. Erin, something we probably mentioned throughout those, and when we talk to businesses, many of us are hearing the terms carbon neutral and net zero. Could you tell us, what do these mean and how do they connect with our emission reductions journey?
Absolutely. You'll often hear carbon neutral and net zero used interchangeably. However, they are not the same thing at all. Carbon neutral refers to a complete offset of any emissions, Scope 1, 2, and 3, that your business is producing. So in theory, you could not cut your emissions at all, purchase offsets through carbon credits or carbon removal projects or something like that, and you could call yourself carbon neutral. However, the real goal for the journey that we're going to be discussing in this podcast is net zero. This is all about decarbonization. So you're actually going to try to reduce and stop the emissions from 90 to 95% of your operations throughout your Scope 1, 2, and 3. So net zero is all about preventing emissions rather than offsetting them. Of course, there might be that last 5-10% that are really, really hard to abate at the moment. So you can offset those while continuing to look for potential solutions. So if you're net zero, you're technically carbon neutral, but if you're carbon neutral, you're not necessarily net zero. And the last thing that I would just like to make sure you take away from that difference is that net zero should be the goal. That's the goal that we're going to be talking about in this podcast, and that's the goal that we as a business community really need to be promoting together and working towards together.
Yeah, and the offsets and carbon neutral definitely had its heyday when we started working together, Erin. We were talking about that a lot, where we seen a lot of projects in inverted commas set up where, they're offering offsets, and, they really weren't doing a whole lot. And I think we've gone past that, thankfully. Like you said, the focus is on net zero. But it is interesting. We're seeing some new regulations real regulations around offsets, in the spaces of biodiversity and in actual biodiversity and in tree planting and everything else, which would be an interesting space to keep an eye on. But at the same time, I think you're right. Net zero is the real focus.
It's very interesting. It was actually a big thing that came out of the climate conference of the parties, or COP. Most recently was finally some text from the Paris Agreement about actual carbon markets and carbon offsetting. But it is still tricky. It really is pretty unregulated, and a lot of it's voluntary. So one huge benefit of going for net zero is not having to wade through all of the jargon and figuring out what are good offsets, what are not. So that's actually a benefit if you're just, don't worry about the offsets, just reduce it at the point source. So
you're removing that risk.
A positive.
You're really, that's a huge risk in some cases. Anyway, let's stay focused, but stick on net zero. It is, and maybe it's something we come back to in the future when we do see, just like you said, there's regulations being drafted out, and we can have a look at those. How do businesses get started on their journey towards net zero? Let's start from the start, and how can we go in that direction?
Absolutely. As with any reduction journey or any journey really at all, you need a baseline. You need to know where you're starting. So to calculate and measure that baseline, that's about gathering your current information, understanding your current emissions, and if you're looking to do that, if that's where you are in your journey, check out our previous 2 podcasts. We talk a bit more about how to actually do that, so I'm not going to take our time today to look at the actual calculation of it, but I will say greenhouse gas protocol, that's where to start when you want to set your baseline, and it's where you want to start as you continue to measure moving forward and trying to reach your goal. Next step is target setting. You know where you're starting from, your baseline, and you know where you want to go, net zero. Now we need kind of the signposts in the middle. Yes, that net zero target's amazing, whether it's 2030, 2050, whatever you want it to be, but we need interim targets as well. So it's really good to have a 50% reduction target, or a scope 1 and 2 net zero target, and then you work on scope 3. There's a lot of different ways to kind of signpost your journey, but you also want to be able to celebrate those wins and those targets as you get there to keep up the momentum to that final grand goal of net zero.
Yeah, and it's like anything in your business, you need to have those targets with milestones, and you need that route to get you there. So with anything in your business, and this is nothing, it's always the same, try and make them specific and measurable. In our last episode, we talked about scope 3. It's such a big area. It's easy to get overwhelmed. So let's try and make it achievable for your business. Break it down into a manageable but actionable plan that's always, progressing towards impact and progressing towards your goal. So having those interim targets or milestones is a really good idea, I think, when you're target setting. So and it's really good for your communication as well. So you don't have the data yet, you haven't reached that goal, but you're bringing people on a journey, and you're saying next year we want to be 10% better, and the year after 20% better, and map out your route to net zero. It's a really nice way to engage stakeholders, I think, as well, and bring people on the journey with you.
Yeah, and even if you don't perfectly hit every single interim target exactly on the nose of when you want to hit it, that is okay. You can still communicate that. Let's say you want to be 50% reduction by 2030, and you hit a 45% or even a 35% reduction. That's still incredible. It's still a step on the journey. Not everything might go as planned, but we at least need the route to start moving that way. And a 35 or 45% reduction is way better than no reduction. So,
absolutely.
Even if those targets aren't perfect, don't hesitate to communicate what you're doing and to push and make them ambitious, because we can do it, and it is something that we need to do as a business community. So kind of stemming off that and the fact that these targets can be difficult, Donal, I would love to hear from you if there's anything specific you've heard from business owners in your experience as to their biggest challenges, moving from this target setting phase where we're talking about it, we might have a baseline, and we're moving from that into actually getting started, actually implementing that net zero action plan.
Yes. So look, any plan is just as good as the implementation of it. So if you can make all the plans you want, but if you're not implementing it, it's really no good. So the two biggest challenges for business owners that I've come across is one, getting the buy-in across the team, and that might be on the senior management team or just a wider team in general. And then two, just getting the time to do this. So if we look at the buy-in, we want to have a core sustainability team that can manage this, but they want to have the support of senior management so that everyone on the team and in the business knows that, okay, it's actually important that we turn this machine off at night when we go home, or it's important that we turn off the lights. And they're all striving towards the same goal, because we can have that plan, but it really takes everyone on the team to make it happen across the business. And then two is the time. And this is definitely from a business owner or senior management perspective. It's giving the employees and team members the, I suppose, comfort that they can take out a chunk of their time to work on this. And it mightn't be too much, but it's actually giving them the freedom that they know that it's okay to spend time working on this and allowing them to do that. Oftentimes these things get reprioritized, and the sustainability can fall down when a deadline for something else is looming. So it's really important to allow them to carve out the time to do this. So I think it really is that getting buy-in, across the business, and then getting the time and actually letting the team member feel and the sustainability champion feel that it's fine and it's okay to work on this and to have time to do it. So they're the two challenges, and both very fixable in my opinion.
Absolutely. I'd love to just add on to kind of the overall buy-in of team members from top to bottom and everywhere in between, is starting with kind of easy wins, showing people that instant gratification of, okay, we all turned off our monitors 80% of the time when we left. Like, it doesn't even need to be a perfect thing. We all turned them off as much as we possibly could, ideally 100% of the time. And look, we saved X amount on our electricity. Like, that's really cool. That's something we did all together, and that translates to X% of our goal over the next 10 years, which is, people see that what they did actually has an impact. And that's really great for people. But then you could also translate it into we saved this amount of money for the finance people who kind of buy into that side of sustainability as well, because more efficient practices usually will save you money as well, which is a win-win.
It is indeed. And I think having those quantifiable improvements that are easy to communicate, especially, like you said, maybe with the finance team or with people who are looking at the figures and thinking, why should we dedicate time and resources towards this? That's definitely really, really important. And that's our sort of end goal, or sort of one of the goals when we're implementing all of this. But what would be the three sort of steps or easy wins to get to that point, Erin? Or how should people really get started here?
Yeah, what's great about net zero and net zero action planning to me is that your other action planning kind of feeds into it. So what I mean by this is, if you're trying to reduce your overall energy usage as an office or as a business, that's almost like a nested part of your net zero plan, right? So tackling these individual areas is a great place to start, specifically looking at energy, starting with an energy audit to look at where your high energy use aspects of your business are, because those high energy use aspects are also going to be your high emissions aspects. That's a really good place to start. And if you do it internally, they're also very controllable places to start. So having that energy audit under your energy action plan, which is probably a really important part of the initial phase of your net zero action plan, is really, really useful. And there's a lot of great resources and people out there who are doing great energy action audits all over the place. So you can always bring in a professional. And if you're in Ireland, there is some great funding for that as well to make it happen for you. And we also have kind of already talked a little bit about the importance of bringing people on the journey with you, whether that's external stakeholders by communicating your interim goals, or more importantly, for kicking off your net zero strategy, your internal stakeholders, your employees, your team members, everyone who is going to need to be part of the culture shift to achieve your goals. Start with a team town hall. Bring everyone together for a meeting. tell them what the plan is, tell them why, tell them how they can get involved, and tell them what is kind of expected of them. And then have some kind of open forum brainstorming session so it feels like they're part of the collaborative process. And I don't say feels like it in a cynical way. I say feels like it because they are going to be part of the process. Take their ideas and write them down. They might not be something you're implementing right now, but they'll be helpful kind of down the line. And when people are able to engage in the planning process, when they're able to engage in these conversations, they're more likely to engage in the culture shifts and kind of action shifts that are necessary to reach your goals in the long term. And then kind of finally, this is probably my longest 3 top tips ever, but it's a big topic and it's exciting. So your last one, again, is with engagement, but it's engaging your broader supply chain. As we've discussed in the previous podcast, scope 3 is tricky. It involves asking for data. It involves collaboration across organizational boundaries. So you want to start those conversations early. Your net zero action plan might start with your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, which actually I would recommend you start with your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. But in tandem with that, make sure you are starting to build the relationships that you need to get that scope 3 information, and to ask them to even take action to reduce their own emissions, or to ask them about their own wins with emissions reductions, if they have any challenges, if they have any solutions for challenges you're facing. You want to start that relationship immediately. So just to wrap that up really quickly and to summarize, start with kind of your energy action plan, scope 1 and 2 section, and potentially do an energy audit to kickstart that process. Host a team town hall to bring everyone in your organization on the journey with you from the start, and then kind of expand that engagement to your broader supply chain to foster those relationships that you'll need for data and action in the future.
Brilliant. And I really like that point around building relationships with your supply chain. And it's not just about getting data. It's actually, this can just build far more resilient relationships, which will affect your business in a lot more better ways than just getting data. Have an open line of communication with your suppliers around deliveries, around the materials, around everything else. So I guess it's got many other positives along with getting the data that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that highlights something that's really great about sustainability, is that any action you're taking usually is touching more than one aspect of your business. It's going to have multiple positive impacts rather than just emissions reduction or just energy reduction or cost reduction. It's going to foster overall resilience and build your business and build their capacity in a really positive way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So kind of to get into a little bit of the benefits and pieces of this journey that businesses can use as a bit of a competitive advantage, I want to talk about communication. How can businesses obviously track the journey and then communicate it to a broader audience as they move towards their overall net zero goal?
Yeah, well, look, I'm happy to jump in there, Erin. And when we're looking at making that commitment, and it is a huge commitment, when you get all of these pieces in place and you're on that journey, it's, why not get the benefit from that and align with other companies who have made this really big commitment as well, and in terms of time and resources and everything else. So there's a number of different ways. One of the big ones we work with businesses is science-based targets, and there's 2 sort of levels. One, is large corporates, and this is where the data is verified and assured, and there's a lot of work in there, but a lot of the time these businesses have teams or dedicated people working on it. They also do have an SME stream, which I know you've worked with a few businesses on as well. That's a really nice way to make the commitment, start gathering the data and get on that journey, and you can still then be on that science-based targets certified journey, I suppose. So that's
the SME. Sorry, I just want to jump in to make it very, very, very clear. The SME pathway is still verified. Like, you still check all your data and all of that. It's just kind of a more prescribed route, I would say, to get you from your current baseline to your net zero goal. It's a little bit more prescriptive around what data you need, how to present it, and kind of your interim targets and all that, which is actually very helpful. But it's still verified. It's still highly recognized all over the world. So yeah, not as rigorous and as heavy of a lift as the full large corporate, which makes sense because they're more complex and larger and will have more data. But definitely still really, really positive.
Thank you for clarifying that as well, Erin. And I think what we're seeing, and the sort of trickle-down effect again, is with science-based targets, a lot of the time if these bigger corporates are using it, they're kind of looking at that then down their supply chain on that SME pathway. So it's a really nice way to do it. And there is a bit of work there, but, you know, I think it will pay dividends. There's also online calculators, plenty of them out there that will, you know, look at scope 1 and 2, some going into scope 3, and then helping you, I suppose, present that data and, you know, tell that story. And then, you know, with us at ENSO as well, on our platform, we'll look at your scope 1 and scope 2 in its entirety, some of scope 3, and we can do some additional work with businesses to help them map out their scope 3 to scope 3 impacts. So there's lots of different ways out there, different ways of gathering the data, but in the end, the data is the same. It's just different frameworks you put it in. And I suppose what's your priorities, or what are your customers looking at? What are your stakeholders looking at? Just the carbon disclosure project as well, and just a couple of different other frameworks out there. But for us, probably science-based targets is the most, the best one out there for a lot of businesses to get into supply chains and to communicate what they're doing. Yeah,
it's just coming up more and more around those science-based targets. I feel like we're hearing about it a lot. And it's a good way to hold yourself accountable, to make sure you are tracking and updating your overall emissions figures on a regular basis. Because as with any target, as with any goal, you need to kind of measure it and see your progress as you go, whether it's using an online calculator, SBTI, or your own Excel sheets or whatever it might be for calculating your progress. Yeah, and Erin, one of the big questions we get, and it's sort of going back to the start, if an SME in particular is looking at scope 1 and 2, like overall, businesses ask, like, does their emissions really matter? And especially when you're looking at remote teams, and maybe they don't have a big factory, but, you know, your typical, I've got a factory with 10 raw materials, we produce X, Y, and Z, and have emissions on that. You know, businesses are different now, especially in the sort of digital environment. Yeah, would you have any comments on that? And do they actually really matter? No, absolutely. This is particularly relevant even for us, Donal and ENSO, because our entire carbon footprint is scope 3. We don't have any scope 1 or 2 emissions because we're fully remote. We are both on energy tariffs that have like renewable energy involved. So our entire footprint is scope 3. So if you weren't considering indirect emissions, it would be easy to be like, oh yeah, emissions don't matter to us. But there are so many pieces of what we do that have knock-on emissions impacts. So whether it's our online data storage, use of data centers and things like that, that has emissions. Our purchased paper, our purchased podcasting equipment, things like that, they have embedded carbon footprints. So while it's easy to feel like your emissions might not be important, or it might not be something important for you to focus on when you don't have a huge physical footprint, because you can't really do anything about your electricity use or waste output or water use or whatever it might be. Always remember that your emissions go beyond the direct. You might just have to skip the scope 1 and 2 step and jump right to scope 3 like we have at ENSO, but that doesn't mean there isn't something for you to work on.
Yeah. Erin, I think that could be a whole entire podcast by itself around digital emissions, you know, scope 3 for remote teams. And there's a lot there, and we're working with businesses all the time on it.
Yeah, well, we can do a podcast as we continue to figure it out for ourselves. We're a remote team with our scope 3 emissions going on as well, so that'll be a very personal journey for us.
Brilliant. Erin, thank you for all the tips there, and I really think it makes it practical and shows people how to get started, and especially on that net zero journey, which is where, as we said at the start, as a business community, that's where we need to be headed, and that's where our focus really needs to be. From my point of view, so just to recap, It's really important for SMEs to monitor and work to reduce their overall emissions. This will really help you make a more resilient business, ready to align with the broader sustainability goals and be an ideal partner for other sustainability minded businesses.
And remember, it's not about perfection. It's about progress. We're all learning and working to figure out the best reduction strategies. It's a hard journey. It's tough. You might not meet your targets. You might overshoot some of your targets, which is incredible. And both are great. Every step on the journey is important. So you're going to take all these twists and turns, but make sure you're learning, adapting, sharing your knowledge, sharing your kind of wins, your challenges, and everything in between. It's a great way to be transparent and to collaborate with your peers moving forward. As we continue to learn our own Scope 3 journey, and as best practices and stories and all of the great learnings come from our customers, we'll continue to share them with you here, and we'll continue to help you take action in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and if Irish SMEs can lead the way, we can really create a better future for everyone. As always, please visit ENSOimpact.com. We've got lots of resources, guides, and tools to help you on your net zero journey and the rest of your sustainability strategy.
Yeah, and don't forget to follow us for updates. We'll always be sharing our thoughts and best practices with you. And if you have any specific questions or need any assistance, reach out to us. We love talking about sustainability with businesses, regardless of your challenge and what your goals are.